next, we just want to talk about how, as individuals, how we approach and talk about God to other peeps.
Yeah, it's a really good question, especially if we live in a time where people aren't buying into the same basic narrative of how the world works. I want to do a bit of a philosophical shift here for a lot of people, because I would imagine, and again, I'm going to overgeneralize, but I would imagine a lot of people, in the way that they've been taught about how to talk about God, assumes that our Christian spaces are where God is, and that those spaces outside of our Christian spaces, God isn't there, that those are godless spaces. And we need to take God into those godless spaces, and we need to get people believing the right things. So then hearing what it is that they believe, or offering a narrative that offers them the right belief per se, is how many of us in some way, shape or form have been taught. I want to create a whole different lens. And the foundation for this lens for me is Paul in Athens in Acts 17. Paul in Athens in Acts 17 forms my whole modus operandi for how I operate in the world when I'm sitting down with people who think very differently from me, when I'm doing all my other media work in spaces that we wouldn't define as Christian. Paul in Athens seems to work from the philosophy that God is already present here in some way, that these people are seeking God. And so he does a wander around the city. He's been speaking to the philosophers, and they want to hear more. And they effectively put him on trial in this place called Mars Hill, the Areopagus, where the philosophers and the aristocrats of Athens gather to hear new ideas and new thoughts. And they put him to the test. He turns up and says, I've taken a wander around your city. Now, there's a whole lot that Paul would have seen that would have been abhorrent to his moral and ethical sensibilities as a good Jewish man. But he doesn't point out all the things that he sees that are wrong. He points out this one statue, and he says, I see this one statue that you have to the unknown God. I want to explain that God. Now, he doesn't use his own scriptures. He draws on their philosophers. He says some really interesting stuff, and I want to read it. I'm going to read it from the NRSV. We get to verse 26, and this is Paul speaking. From one ancestor, he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth. This is talking about God. And he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. He quotes their poets, but he's taking on this idea that every single person has been created to search for God, and that God is not far away. Now, I believe that nothing can separate us from the love of God. So no person is separated from the love of God. We turn ourselves in different directions. That means that God is in every place that we would go. So our question then is not, how do I get this person to believe the right thing? Our question is, how do I serve this person? How do I wash this person's feet? God is already here. My job is to tune into what God is already up to. And when we talk to people about spirituality, what we'll hear is the whispers of them seeking out God, and we'll hear the whispers of the God who is close to them. So then our job is to name that when it's appropriate, to help people connect the dots, to celebrate it, to lift it up, and to participate in what the Spirit is already doing. Now, the difficulty of this is there's no formula for it. What it demands of us is that we're close to God. And so then our rhythms of engaging with the Spirit, our personal life of prayer, all of these things that open us up to be shaped by God are really important, because it's the Holy Spirit in us speaking to the Holy Spirit in somebody else. That's what's going on. That's what we want to happen. The only way that happens is if we're close to God. There's no formula to lean on here.
How do we do that in our churches then, Frank? What should the sort of focus be or needs to be in our churches for that?
Yeah, I think our churches, and again, I'm going to overgeneralize, but I would say that one of the emphasis of our churches for quite some time has been to grow our numbers, to get more people in our churches. Now, there are good reasons for that, but I think to equip us for the Aotearoa New Zealand that we find ourselves in, and the nature of what the church needs to be for years and years to come, I think we need to refocus our attention back on discipleship and spiritual formation, forming our people and their own daily rhythms of prayer and our communal worship, so that we are journeying close to the Holy Spirit. And as we journey close to the Holy Spirit, being transformed by that Spirit to connect with what God is doing in the world around us. Our people need to be comfortable and confident with sharing their faith, not with some formula, but just as a natural part of who they are, and able to confidently connect with the spiritual conversations that other people are desperately wanting to have as well, not in a mode of judgment, but in a mode of invitation and gift. So, for instance, I remember having a chat with a famous New Zealand comedian. And he talked about how he believes that there's this benevolent spirit in the world that is moving everything towards good. And I said to him, I believe the same thing. I would call that God. And I believe that that thing became a person. I would call that person Jesus. There's no sense of trying to get him to believe the right thing. It's just sitting at the table, hearing what he's thinking, going, here's what we have in common, and here's how I would see that, and offering that as a gift for him to do with whatever he's going to do. That only comes with being confident in our faith. And our churches are spaces where we form, we practice with one another, we learn to love each other, we develop our own spiritual discipline so that we're all walking close to the Spirit.
Well said. Really big responsibility on us just to stop and listen. Listen. How people connect the dots. I love the way you said that, Rev. You should become a reverend or pastor or something like that. You're pretty good. You're pretty good. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Always enlightening as per usual. You take care of yourself, okay, Rev? And we'll catch up with you next week.